Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Josh Doing, and I'm the Startup Success Manager at UMD's UM Ventures. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to everybody who's joined us today. This workshop is part of our ongoing Startup Fundamentals Workshop series. The series is offered by UM Ventures with collaboration from the Maryland Technology Enterprise Institute and the Diegman Limon Center for Entrepreneurship at the University of Maryland. We have workshops on different topics and pertaining to entrepreneurship, as well as conversations with entrepreneurs, which is what today's workshop will be. This workshop is being recorded. We try and post as many of these workshops as possible to our YouTube channel afterwards. It's a great place for you to go and check out past workshops on topics or people that might be interesting to you. To everybody here who is here during the live session, please feel free to submit questions during to the chat. I will be monitoring that and trying to lift it up to our speakers. And I think that's it for announcements. But I am honored to be able to introduce Laura and Eshwar today, who are going to be having a conversation a little bit about Laura's entrepreneurial journey. Laura is a leader with a record of delivering both in public and private sectors. She's held public office and was CEO and company builder in the private sector, ranging from venture-backed startup to established national organization. She has mentored, consulted, or evaluated hundreds of early stage or startup companies, and her most notable achievement in business was to build a technology startup, Matrics, raising $17 million in venture capital and sell for over $230 million. She's going to do a much better job telling her story than I just did. So I'm excited to again be able to participate in this. And with that, I'll pass it to you, Laura and Eshwar.
Thanks for the intro, Josh. I appreciate it. I'm so happy to have all of you here with us today. And, I love talking about my entrepreneurial journey, but I thought it'd be a lot more fun if we could do it through the eyes of a young prospective entrepreneur. So Ishwar is a student at University of Maryland. We've worked together on my podcast, The Laura Neuman Show, which has been amazing. And he's going to actually interview me. So if you have questions, post them in the chat. We want to answer any questions you have. And this is meant to be conversational and fun. And at the end of this conversation, I actually want you to see entrepreneurship as a potential path for your career, or if you're already well established in your career, as something you might want to consider on your journey. Because for me, it led to tremendous opportunity that I wouldn't have had otherwise. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ishwar. You're in charge, man.
Perfect. Yeah. First of all, thank you. Thank you for the warm introduction. And just to get started, can we get a quick insight on how you got here today? Uh, a little bit about your background.
Well, I didn't actually plan to be an entrepreneur. What I really just wanted to do was find a path to opportunity. And unfortunately, for not for all of us, that's not available. And I really struggled in the early days. Fortunately, my children are in college and they're having a great experience, but I didn't have that available to me. The truth is that I grew up in inner city Baltimore. I left home when I was a teenager with everything I owned in a plastic trash bag and lived out of my car. And I lived out of my car for several months and I encountered incredible setbacks that made it almost impossible to figure out how to build a life for myself. And I realized when that happened that I had a choice. I could either give up, which seemed quite easy at the time. There wasn't much really helping me move forward because I was estranged from my family and I felt very much on my own. But instead of giving up, I decided I was going to be the person who believed in myself. And so I worked really hard, and despite having no high school diploma, I dropped out of high school after the 11th grade and not going to college, I decided I would continue to try. And so I'd been a waitress, I had worked in retail, all the jobs that you can get without a high school diploma or a college degree. And I decided that I didn't know what my path would be, but I wouldn't stop trying. And my very first job in business was answering 800 number calls for a company called T. Rowe Price. And that's when I realized there's this whole world out there I didn't know about. I wasn't exposed to it growing up. And I wanted to work for the traditional companies. I wanted to work for those big companies that we all are so drawn to: Apple, Microsoft, T. Rowe Price. But the truth is that those companies weren't ever going to either hire me or promote me. And that's why I decided to become an entrepreneur.
Perfect. And so to kind of dig into your early mindset trying to become an entrepreneur, what was an internal belief that was your biggest obstacle early on?
Well, fundamentally, I think there are 5 key principles to success, whether you're on the entrepreneurial journey or you choose a different path. And the first and most important truly is a belief in yourself. It's getting absolute clarity about who you are, who you want to be in the world, and how you see yourself in the world. For me, I had grown up in an environment where, I didn't have good role models. My parents made poor decisions. Not only were they both high school dropouts, they had been arrested multiple times. And I had been exposed to a lifestyle that wasn't really going to lead to the kind of success that I wanted. They were struggling, and they honestly never stopped struggling. So what I realized is that first and foremost, the most fundamental thing I needed was, since there was no one else, I was estranged from my family, I was the person who was going to have to believe in myself. That's number one. And once I made that decision that, that would come from me, and I was the most important person on my journey, it was a lot easier to just accept that and move forward. Because I kept wanting someone else to see the potential in me. And when I realized that I could do that for myself, that really was a major shift in thinking. It also is when I decided that what was important to me was to be a person of integrity and a person of character. I was going to reject what I had been taught growing up about, sort of living on the line. And instead, I was going to do my best and I was going to work hard. And that's who I wanted to be. And I believed fundamentally that hard work would set me apart. But the truth is that then led to my second principle for success, which is showing up. It's not enough to just say, okay, this is who I want to be. The next thing you need to do is actually be there. And so being in places where opportunity exists is what changed my trajectory. I got the job answering 800 number calls at T. Rowe Price, and that put me in a whole nother environment that I didn't even know about. So being around people who are doing the things that you want to do is essential. If you want to be an entrepreneur, go to entrepreneurial events. If you want to work in business, be in an office, go to the events where business people are. If you want to be in computer science, join the computer science club. It's very important to surround yourself with an environment and with people who have the same goals that you have. And then my third principle became investing in yourself. Because the next thing that happened for me, I was going to everything I could possibly attend. I would always show up. I made it my mission to show up. And one of the ways that I did that is after, about 10 years of working in business and trying to get an opportunity and really struggling to be noticed because I didn't check the traditional boxes, I still worked hard. I still showed up. And one day I was working for a company I did not want to necessarily work for. It wasn't my ideal job, but I made a commitment to that company. And so I showed up prepared every day. And a customer came in one day from Loyola University in Maryland. And because it was my job to do good work for this company, I did my best. And afterwards, they were so impressed with how I handled the meeting that they invited me to apply to their MBA program, which was really amazing, but also super embarrassing because the truth is I wasn't qualified. And I realized this is another time when I would have to show up. And so I called them up and said, hey, can I come in and meet with you? And they were like, why don't you just fill out the application online? Why do you need to come in? And I said, well, I'd just like to come in and meet with you. And I went in and met with the assistant dean and I said, look, this is my story. And I explained my early challenges and how it was really difficult to go to college. And I said, would you consider making an exception? And, because we're always full of optimism, I assumed they'd say yes. And of course they didn't. Instead, they said, well, these are the things you would have to do. And they gave me 3 things that I had to do in order to even be considered. And they said, and this is really important, you can do everything right and we still might not accept you. So you can do all the work we're asking you to do and you still might not be accepted. And I had to accept those terms. And I did. The first one was take a GMAT. I didn't know what a GMAT was at the time. And I had to get a certain score. Check that box. Second was recommendations. I needed great recommendations. Well, the recommendation that ultimately was the most influential was from 10 years earlier at T. Rowe Price when I was answering 800 number phone calls as a part-time customer service rep. I had shown up one day when there was a huge snowstorm and a lot of people didn't make it into the office. And the CEO wrote me a letter thanking me for coming in and showing up. That letter actually led to him writing me a letter of recommendation for the MBA program. And that's such an important lesson because showing up 10 years earlier led to this great opportunity that would honestly change my life. And the third was I needed employer sponsorship. Well, ultimately, I was accepted, which is how I got an MBA without finishing high school or college. It was a
Wow.
pretty amazing journey. And it
Yeah.
actually will take me
That
into my fourth principle, which I'll share as well.
mhm. You can keep going. Yeah.
You want me to jump into
So
that? Okay, so the
yeah, yeah.
fourth principle that I really third principle that I fundamentally believe in. First is believe in yourself. Second is to show up consistently.
Mhm.
The third is to invest in yourself. And like, what does that mean, right? If you're in college, if you've gone to college, what does it mean did you buy a house? Are you saving? Did you open a Roth IRA? What does invest in yourself look like? Investing in yourself is choosing to do things that are really hard because they will further you on your trajectory, your journey in your career, in your life. Right after I was accepted into the MBA program, I had employer sponsorship because I got my first job in tech. I was so excited about that. And then immediately after I was accepted, my company was acquired, which meant that my employer sponsorship went away. So now I've been accepted into this great program, and this is a life-changing opportunity, but my employer sponsorship is gone, and I had a choice. I could pay for it myself. They give me the choice to pay for it, or I could drop out. Of course, I just said, I'll figure it out. And I put it on a credit card. I paid for it on a credit card. I chose to make that investment in myself because I knew that this opportunity was going to change where my career went. That's really important, is understanding if you make this investment, will it help you get to where you want to go? And right after I got the MBA, I was invited to the executive program at Stanford Business School, and I had to pay for that too. Because not only did I not have employer sponsorship, I was at that point a tech entrepreneur. It was 3 years later, and I was the employer and the employee. So as an employee, I couldn't go to my employer and say, hey, can you sponsor me for this program at Stanford? The truth is, we were struggling to survive. We were trying to keep the business afloat. And I could only do that by raising the money to pay all of us. And at the same time that I was closing my first round of venture capital, I was also at Stanford Business School for the summer. So, that's the third key principle, which is choosing to invest in yourself.
Very cool. Very cool. So to kind of tap into your first principle, um, how did you learn to trust your own judgment before you had external validation or help?
That's a really tough one. I'm not sure that we ever feel like we're 100% there, right? I mean, to this day, I'm still learning.
Mhm.
And I view it as introspection. Like, I'm introspective. I always want to learn. But I think it's like what we hear of is the growth mindset. Are you
Mhm.
always open to learning new things? Are you always curious? If there's one thing that I can say that is like a common thread, it's curiosity. If you have a
Mhm.
basic curiosity about life, about people, about work, about technology, about hobbies, that curiosity will carry you pretty far because it's always about learning something new. And so that for me, I don't know if it's naturally that way, but that's always been really helpful for me. Choosing to believe in myself was really because I knew that there wasn't anyone else. I was completely estranged from my family. I was estranged from my community. I'd been through serious trauma as a young person, and I didn't have the community support that I needed. And so I was very much alone for a long time in those early years. And I just knew that I had two choices. I could curl up in a ball and give up, or I could go forward. And I chose to go forward. And that required that I, believe that I could do that for myself. I believed in myself. Now, don't laugh, but I mean, have you ever heard Snoop Dogg's acceptance of his star on the Walk of Fame in Los Angeles? He said, I was the one who was there for me. I'm thanking myself for this award. The truth is that it's wonderful to have your parents believe in you. It's wonderful to have a great professor. There are a lot of people on the journey who have a real impact in your life and in your career, but at the end of the day, it's really about what you believe for yourself.
Mhm. That's interesting. That's very interesting because coming from a perspective where I do have support from family, friends, etc., it's easy to kind of lean on others for believing in yourself for this baseline support in anything I do. I have you as well to guide me through anything that I need. But it's very interesting to hear a perspective where you have to truly believe in yourself. You are your own sole supporter and move forth in that sense. So
Well, there is some
that's
research around this that says that the people who make it out, who are successful, have a
Mhm,
central person in their life who believed in them. I do think it's
mhm,
really great if you have that, but not all of us have that. And that doesn't mean that people on my journey weren't helpful. I mean, there were people who had a significant impact. And I'm very grateful for the relationships and friendships and influences along the way. But at the end of the day, the only person who's on that whole journey with you is you.
mhm. Yeah. So to kind of dive more into interpersonal relationships, how did you end up developing these mentorship relationships with people along your journey? How did you approach people to essentially ask for help or guide you along your journey?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I actually never had a mentor because I didn't know what a mentor was. So until I was well into my 20s. So I was working at this company that did direct marketing in my 20s, and we worked with banks. And I had a client, and I never thought of clients as clients. I thought of them as like friends, right? So I enjoy working with people, and I had this client who was also a friend, and we did a lot of things together that friends do. We went to Grateful Dead concerts, and we hung out together. And she said to me, so we kind of let our guard down because we got to know each other a little better. And she told me about her mentor, and she worked at one of the largest banks in New York City. And I was like, well, what is that? And she said, well, when I have questions, I have someone I can go to who gives me guidance. Now, her father had worked at that same bank, and she was on the management track in that bank. So she was seen as someone who has potential. And the bank was willing to invest in her. So they had a senior executive guiding her on her career path. That is a wonderful thing. And if you can have that, if that's available to you, there isn't any better way to go, truthfully, because that experience, nothing can replace it. In my case, I asked for help along the way because I didn't really have that mentor kind of relationship because my path was non-traditional, right? I didn't go to college. I wasn't on a management training program. What I did was along the way when I had a question, I wasn't afraid to ask. So
Mhm,
that brings me to my fourth principle, which is betting on yourself. At the end of the day, to be an entrepreneur, you have to be willing to bet on yourself. And I remember one of my first or early conversations was, I was trying to figure out how to do this, how to be an entrepreneur. And I reached out to someone who was an entrepreneur and successful, and I said, can I meet with you? And he said,
mhm,
yes. And so he gave me some of the best advice on raising venture capital that I've ever had. And I was just so struck that he was willing to share that. And that's one thing you'll find in the entrepreneurial community. Maybe a little bit different than the traditional business community where there's more hierarchy and structure and org chart. In the entrepreneurial community, people want to help each other because they've been there, right?
Right.
So when I asked to meet with him, he said yes, and he gave me great advice. And then I sent him a thank you note. Nothing replaces a handwritten thank you note. And I sent him a gift of some cigars because I knew he liked cigars. Very small gesture that had a lasting impact. People just want to be seen no matter where they are in their career or how high they go. Those kinds of things really have a huge impact. So I highly recommend, making those connections where you can. You will find that people want to be helpful and they know what it's like to be starting out as an entrepreneur. They want to share that with you. And
Mhm.
when you're ready, I want to move on to the fourth principle of betting on yourself because I think it's so important to understand the risk that goes with being an entrepreneur.
Yeah, you can go ahead and jump right into it.
Okay, so look, I didn't plan to be an entrepreneur. For me, although I think every single one of us has that in us, being a successful entrepreneur is not about checking boxes. It's not about saying, okay, well, I'm just going to start a company. It's not about, being born an entrepreneur. It's about solving problems and being resilient and getting to the other side and realizing that you have something to offer and that you are going to keep going. So, being an entrepreneur is not about success because a big part of it is failure. You have to be resilient enough to try something, have it not work out, and still keep going. That's an
Mhm,
entrepreneurial mindset, and that is absolutely essential if that's the path that you want to go. So for me, I got my first job in tech and it was great, except that my company was acquired. Now I'm in an MBA program and super grateful for that. But I thought once I was in the MBA program, all these companies would be like, sure, we want to hire you now. Well, that didn't happen. They want to hire really bright kids, probably a lot of people who are on this call, right out of college, and put them on a management track. And that's a great path, but that path wasn't available to me. So, I kept working at different companies and working my way up. And now I have this, I'm an MBA candidate. I have this MBA program. And then I went back to all those same companies. And I said, applied again. And they all said no, because they had a model and I didn't fit it. They had boxes to check and I didn't check those boxes. So I said, okay, I'll go to smaller companies. So I started taking jobs in smaller companies. And what I realized is that I had something to offer. And in smaller companies, it's a little frustrating because you have maybe less experienced management or less structure, maybe less support. You have to be willing to sort of jump in and take initiative. Well, I was willing to do that. And so I ended up in this company in DC, which was, a tech startup, and they had a patent on this new technology. And that company was very successful. I closed just about every deal in their S1 when they filed for an IPO. Because, sales at the end of the day is instrumental for success in business, especially if you're on a non-traditional path. So I closed all these deals and I was like thinking, I've made it, right? I thought they were paying me this big salary now and I got promoted and I got this great title, but I didn't get equity. And for someone who's a self-starter and willing to take initiative and work hard, and by the way, close the deals, you want upside. If you're going to take the risk of being an entrepreneur, you want to have the upside when there's success. And that was a real valuable lesson for me. The real money, the real generational wealth, the real value creation is in ownership. And so I wanted to be an equity holder. So when I left that company, I was like, okay, fine, I'll start my own company. And I did. And I started a company with someone else I had worked with, and we raised altogether close to $90 million in venture financing commitments, venture capital and equipment financing commitments. That's a lot of money. It was also the first time I'd ever started a company. And I knew that I wasn't the person to run it because I didn't have enough experience. So we hired, a really accomplished CEO. And we thought he was going to join the team, and we were pretty close to closing it. And he went back to his employer and they put a better offer on the table that we could not meet because they were an established company. And so we lost him. I spent an entire year building that company before it shut down. I mean, that's a huge commitment. I cashed in my savings. I was paying my mortgage on a credit card at that point. I took a tremendous amount of risk to launch that company, and it didn't get off the ground. And you could say, well, that's a failure, right? I mean, who wants to do that? Who wants to spend a year spending all their money and, putting everything on the line and then not have it take off? That risk is inherent in entrepreneurship, and you have to be willing to accept it. And I don't want you to think I accepted it gracefully, because I didn't. It was really, there were times that I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know how I'm going to do today. But it's just a fact. I mean, it's not as easy and glamorous as it looks. Sometimes it feels really bad. But the truth is that the next company after that, it was also a huge risk. I was approached and asked if I would run a tech transfer deal out of NSA. And at first I was kind of hesitant. I spent a lot of months with these guys before I actually signed on. And ultimately I signed on to run this company that, by the way, did not have enough money to pay me. So after a year of trying to launch a company, now I've signed on to run a company that has no resources. It has no money. They cannot pay me. I now had to cash in my retirement account and take out loans and borrow money and continue to pay my mortgage on a credit card to run a company and sign on to run a company that was essentially insolvent. And they had been around for over 3 years, 3.5 years, trying to get this company off the ground. But the lesson in here, which is so important, obviously you're taking risk. I took a lot of risk. You don't get the payoff without taking the risk. It's very rare. But that failure, that company that didn't get off the ground, is how I learned how to raise money. So while I was at that company, I learned how to raise venture capital, and I took those same experiences into this new opportunity and raised the money to launch this company. So, and by the way, I didn't know anything about raising money. I went to a webinar like this actually it was in person, called How to Raise Venture Capital. So I went to a program
Mhm.
just like we're in right now. And, two people presented how to raise venture capital. I approached each of them afterwards and I said, hey, can I meet with you and present my business plan? And they both said yes. Well, that experience in the company that was a failure, the one that didn't get off the ground, is what prepared me for the next company and for it being a success. So that company I raised the money for, it was RFID technology, and the company was hugely successful. Not only did I raise the venture capital to launch that company, it was voted Venture Deal of the Year. It became a case study at Princeton University. Uh, it was a hugely successful company and ultimately had a big exit. Now, I didn't personally manage the exit because it was a very contentious negotiation with one of the investors, and they wanted to pull back some of the equity in the company, and I didn't agree with that, so that made it difficult. But at the end of the day, you have to accept that those kinds of things happen in business. Different people have different perspectives. You're not always going to agree. And at the end of the day, I wanted the company to be successful, and I also wanted to own my equity. And so we negotiated that, and it ended up being great for everyone. When the company was sold, it changed my life. Everyone had a big exit, including the investors, and that was a win for all parties involved. And that's the ideal scenario. So, yes, I took the risk, but I did it for equity. When I was putting everything on the line, I wasn't doing it for a salary or a title, I was doing it for equity this time. And then when the company was sold, of course, that was a big exit for everyone, including me.
Wow. That's that's amazing. I think just to backtrack a little bit, so when you're taking these big risks and betting on yourself, how do you take these big risks without being quote unquote reckless? So how do you
Great
mindfully take these
question.
risks?
That's a great question. I've never been asked that question, Ishwar. Well, I'll give you the advice that I give everyone else, and then I'll go back to what I actually did.
Mhm.
I tell everyone to have a timeline and have a maximum amount of money that you will spend.
Mhm.
For example, maybe it's a year, maybe it's 2 years. The guys who are running this company the story I just shared with you, they were 3.5 years in when I met them. And they only had a couple months left before their wives were like, we're done. Okay, you've done this. You have to, you've put the time in, you've invested in it. And they were at the end of that timeline with their families. And realistically, there has to be a timeline. There has to be a limit because we have to pay the bills. We have to, keep a roof over our head. And there are other people in our lives that we have to think about. I did all of this before I had a family, so that made a big difference. It made it easier to take that kind of risk. I would still take the risk even if I did have a family. That's a personal decision. But you should always have a timeline. And you should always have a maximum amount of money that you're willing to put at risk. And once you've hit that, like, that's it. That's all you have. Now, in my case, I didn't have a safety net, right? I didn't have
Right.
family that I could turn to. I didn't have any place to go. Like, I would have to claim bankruptcy and lose my house and my car and everything that I had worked so hard for. And when you've grown up really poor without resources, it's really hard to contemplate being that way again. So it emotionally is very a difficult thing to do. It's hard to take that kind of risk. But the truth is that you don't get the big reward without taking the risk. And so not having a safety net was probably the best thing for me because I couldn't accept that failure was an option. Like it just wasn't something I could even entertain. And you have to remember that during this time, I'm out at Stanford. I was at Stanford with 143 other people who were like executives from all over the world for 11 weeks. And, or I can't remember how many weeks, it was the whole summer. And they all work for big companies. Like you had to be a country manager or a CEO to be invited to this program. And these were really successful business people. And I'm out there as an entrepreneur raising my Series A, my first round of financing. And I closed the round while I was out there, and so many people came up to me and said, "Wow, this is so cool! Like I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur." And I'm thinking to myself, "Gosh, I always wanted to be you. I want to work for this big company that's like stable and safe, and I know that I'm going to get paid and I'm going to make a good salary." Um, but very few people do it. Take the risk because it's hard to give up the stability that comes with working for a big company to go do something that's such a risk. But the truth is, the real upside only comes by taking that risk. And so at the end of the day, you have to decide whether you're willing to take it or not. Not having a safety net made it impossible for me to consider any other path. If I had a safety net, I'm not sure if I would have done it or not. It's a good question.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of that mindset. I got nothing to lose. So
Right.
it helps you jump into risk a lot easier. That makes sense. But
But it's not easy. It's
mhm,
really not easy. I mean, you can do
yeah.
both. You're a very appealing entrepreneurial candidate for investment if you put some time in with a bigger company. It does prepare you to be an entrepreneur, but you have to go from the security mindset to taking a little bit more risk.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, yeah, so kind of to jump into our like next section, how did you pivot from entrepreneurship to more managerial leadership with your time in office?
Oh, so I've worked with hundreds of early stage companies, several hundred at this point, and I will always do that because I just genuinely love it. I love people creating value and opportunity for themselves, and so I've always thought of myself as an entrepreneur. When I have to fill out a form, no matter how high I go in my career, I always list my title as entrepreneur because I personally think it's the greatest title in the world for a business person. It means that you're creating
Mhm.
value and you're building something. But I also wanted to give back in some way, and so that's my fifth principle, which is advocacy. You have to advocate for yourself throughout your career, but I also wanted to advocate for others, and I wanted to make a difference in my community. So I did that in many different ways, including holding public office. So I didn't expect to do that, but I had the good fortune and honor to serve as a county executive in Maryland, and I will tell you, I absolutely love that work.
Mhm.
Government is very different than business, but the truth is that it's really business with compassion, right? So you still have to, I was running a large organization, but I also really cared about the people in the community and what was important to them. So I had to find a balance. In business, it's all about making money, it's about the results. And I'm comfortable with that. Like I never took that personally, even if I disagreed with someone in business, and there were plenty of times that that happened. I understood at the end of the day it was about creating value and making money for everyone. That is the truth of business. Now we have social entrepreneurship, which is a little more balanced, but business people don't take differences of opinion personally, right? We move on.
Mhm.
When you're in public office and you're responsible for a community, like it is a little more personal, and compassion is definitely part of the equation because you're deploying resources to support an entire community of people, and you have to find that balance. So I wanted to run a great organization, and I think I brought skills to that role that most politicians don't have. But I also just genuinely cared about making sure my community was in a good place. And I took it personally. Like when I'm in the car driving down the street in my community that I run, I'm like feeling responsible for it. Like I felt a real sense of ownership. So it was a really great experience for me to be able to do that too. And advocacy is so important for yourself and for others. And that is a critical part of the success journey.
Nice. So what leadership lesson would you say only became clear once you stepped into the public service side of it?
Which leadership lesson? So, probably for me, and it might be different for other people, I've lived everywhere on the socioeconomic spectrum, like at the bottom and at the top. And what I realized is that no matter where you are on that journey, people are just people at the end of the day, all doing their best, right? Everybody wants to be happy and they want to be able to pay their bills. And, I was kind of in my own head for a long time because I was so focused on creating value for myself and financial security. And as I got to sort of like be out in the community and meeting people, I realized that everybody wants to have a good life. They want to have a family. They want to be happy. They want to be able to like enjoy their free time and also work hard. So
Mhm.
no matter where you are socioeconomically, that need is pretty fundamental. And I was surprised by that.
Very nice. Very nice. And so obviously you've had a very successful career starting out by getting your MBA without a college degree all the way to holding public office uh, at the end of it. what are some habits that you've developed
Mm.
throughout your journey that helped you sustain this long-term growth? What kept this momentum going?
No one's ever asked me that question. That's a great question. Um, I have a final thought on my previous comments, which is that sense of
Oh,
community is really important.
mhm,
As you're focusing on, the life that you're building for yourself and your family, that really requires that you be part of a community. I had that question actually at Harvard Business School with the students there, and there was this real discussion, meaningful discussion around creating sense of community. If there's one thing that I want all young people to hear today, it's the importance of that.
mhm.
Because without a sense of community, it's really hard to feel like, there's purpose in what you're doing. So I do think that's really important. But as to habits, I mean, I'm just going to be honest and tell you the truth. I am the worst admin on the planet. Like, I literally cannot, like, if you ask me to raise venture capital for a company or if you ask me to like build something, I can do that all day long. But if you ask me to create a filing system, it would not be good. Like, it wouldn't work. Like, I would be
Mhm.
undone by that project.
Yeah.
So it's really challenging to be successful if you're not organized. So for me, I had to create habits around organization. So I
Mhm.
started by reading a book called How to Get Organized in 30 Days. And so, that's a weakness for me. So I had to create processes and do the research to get better at that because no one gets everything, right? We all get different skills, but we also are balanced with some of the challenges that we face. That's one of the challenges that I face. I mean, it's just a fact. And so I had to accept it. And the way I accepted it was learning about it. Like, I make it my mission to understand organization and how to be better organized. And, we're all going to have things that we have to work on. That's the thing that I had to work on. So I created habits around organization because if you're not quick on the follow up and follow through, you will not be successful. I don't care which path you choose. You must have habits around organization. Atomic Habits is the big book now, but the work itself is not new. This has been a discussion for decades. So you need to have great follow up. The second habit was about treating people kindly and with respect. I always follow up and say thank you. I make it a point, and I had to learn this to acknowledge people in a positive way, even people that I might not even know that well. So if I'm out at a social event, I introduce people to each other. That was not
Mhm.
comfortable at first. I mean, we're all a little introverted. I mean, anyone who tells you they're not a little introverted, there are very few people who don't have some of that in their personality. I found that if you make the effort to connect people, they're so grateful and they're so appreciative and it like makes everyone feel more comfortable. So that's the second thing I started doing. And the third is I would definitely say that, taking good care of yourself is essential. You need to get outside every day. You need to get exercise every day. I personally really am quite fond of junk food like pizza and nachos, but you got to balance it with, eating healthy and making sure that you have a lot of energy because you want to bring your best self to what you're doing. And so even
Mhm.
though exercise is just not my favorite thing, I was at, boot camp this morning and I showed up fully prepared for that. Like that was the first thing I did today. And I do think that your mindset and your ability to withstand the challenges you'll face and resilience is based on being healthy. And so that was the third thing. I did not grow up that way. It was just not a thing in our family, but I do think it's absolutely essential.
Yeah, I mean that's the main thing my parents tell me to sleep, eat, and work hard. So
Exactly.
yeah, yeah.
Exactly. Well, I know that your
So
parents are awesome.
mhm, I love them too. They're great. I so organizational skills was one thing that I guess you were lacking. What were some habits that you say you had inherently that helped with this growth?
That's a good question. I'm willing to take initiative all the time,
Hmm.
never afraid to take initiative. I will try things knowing that not all of them will happen. When I applied to the Stanford Executive Program, I also applied to another program that I wasn't accepted into. And so, like, I don't take that personally. There are a lot of no's to go along with the yeses. So I'm always willing to show up and try. And I think that if you want to be an entrepreneur, you have to have that mindset because there will be a lot of no's and a lot of disappointment on the road to success. And if you can sustain that, and if you can bounce back from that, and you have the resilience, then you'll eventually get to success. But the timeline is unclear, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
for me, initiative was number one. The second is no one was ever going to outwork me, like
Mhm.
no one. And that's not to be confused with working all the time. Like I was always going to work hard. In my 20s, I worked 3 jobs throughout my 20s, but I had so much fun. I mean, I truly had so much fun. I could tell
Mhm.
you stories of fun that would like things that I'm glad are not recorded today. Like back then, there were no phones or videos or anything. There were cameras and there are a few photos out there, but the truth is that I was not afraid to have fun. I had a lot of fun,
Mhm.
but no one was ever going to work harder than I was. I was always going to outwork anyone around me. And if I'm being honest about it, and I think this is a really important point, being willing to work really hard and having this mindset of no one's going to outwork me can also be a challenge. It's not just an asset, it's also a challenge because there's this balance in there of being a team player, right? You want to work hard, but you also want to be a team player. Being a team player is also essential to success. And I didn't understand that nuance when I was really young. And I wish I had understood it because my hard work and initiative wasn't to make someone else feel like I didn't value their contribution. It was that I was trying to prove myself. And the truth is that you need to do that in a team environment where everyone feels valued. That's an honest
Very cool.
reflection that I can look back now and did not see
Yeah.
at the time.
Yeah.
I had a job review when I was in my 20s and I sat across the desk from my boss at the time, and now understanding that my previous review had been exemplary because I was taking initiative and working hard.
Mhm.
Now he like rewrote it, and he sat across from me and he said, "Well, you're overzealous," and I was like, "Is that good or bad?" Like, I wasn't sure if that was good or bad. The truth is that it's great to work hard, but you don't want to lose the other folks on the team along the way. I mean, you want to value everyone's contribution.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
really important.
Yeah. So I guess this kind of leads into teamwork. Um, how would you say teamwork, how did you work within teams? What habits best helped the team move forward together? Um, yeah,
Good.
along
That's a
those lines,
great
what
question.
habits, what character
Yeah,
traits, etc.
that's a really good question, Ishwar. The truth is that for me, like I had to grow into that.
Hmm.
But when I was in a leadership role, what I realized very early on is that, people come with different experiences. I actually realized it before I was in a leadership role. I remember working for a company where I was working really hard all the time, and I was the person who was always the first to raise my hand. And someone else in my department in a different position came in at 8 every day and left at 5 and took an hour for lunch, like clockwork. And at first I was like, didn't really like that. I was like, well, what do you mean you're not staying past 5? That was her decision, right? She was doing her job and she did it really well. She was very effective at her job. And I learned that I had to respect what her boundaries are, even though I had different boundaries for myself. And her decisions were going to be on her journey, and my decisions were going to be on mine. And so I had that early lesson, which was super helpful for me. And when I found myself in a leadership role where I was making decisions for other people, one of the founders one day left me a note on my desk and he said, you know, I know it's really hard to raise money, and we were raising venture capital at the time, but all of this structure is killing my creativity. Like you're squashing my creativity, and I was like, ouch! Like we need money. We gotta like keep the lights on. Like I have to raise money. We have to do these things. And I was dragging him into all these venture meetings, and you know, it was not his personality. So what I said
Hmm.
to him is, I need you to do this right now. And once we raise the money, you can go back to more flexibility in your schedule. And so I had to find a balance of what we needed as a company and what he needed as an individual. And I do
Hmm.
think that's important. And there's less and less of that these days. I do think that employers are really more focused on the bottom line and not on cultivating their teams and their people. But as a leader myself, I want to create an environment where people can succeed. And I can tell you this, it's one of my bragging rights, and I don't have a lot of them, but it is one of them that, I've hired people over and over again into multiple positions in multiple organizations, and they've been willing to go with me from organization to organization because fundamentally, I respect every voice. You don't have to come to me and say you agree. If you disagree, I want to hear it, but I need you to make a good argument for why. And I can be swayed. So, one of my employees once said to me she could field an NFL team. Now, this is a really senior person on my team said this. And he didn't say it to me. I heard him say it to someone else. The reason is that I fundamentally can see the value in what people have to contribute. And I set a really high bar. But I also value that everyone brings their own perspective. And I'll give you a quick example. When I was running a company and we were like patenting our technology, I was in an industry that was completely underperforming. Not a successful industry. Nobody wanted to invest in it. Well, everybody in that industry was hiring people from the industry. If you hire people from an underperforming industry, it's really hard to find someone who's going to think differently. So I hired half of the team from that industry, and the other half were really smart people who were not from that industry. And do you know that one of the hires I made outside of the industry, asked the right question of the industry person, and it led to a whole new patent and a whole new technology, and it became ultimately the product. Because you need different perspectives. This isn't about DEI or diversity, although I do believe in a very interesting and diverse team. And I don't just mean in ethnicity, I mean in like beliefs and political beliefs and, experience and age. Like today, if I was building a company, I would want people with experience, and I would also want young people who have a whole different perspective. When you put a diversity of experiences and perspectives together, what you get is a better outcome. And so what happened was, I had people who were traditional from this industry and people who were not. And when they came together, they came up with a better solution. And that product is in the marketplace today. That question that was asked by someone who didn't have any history in that industry ultimately led to a whole new patent, a whole new product. And now, all these years later, the product for this particular solution in this industry. That would have never happened. Like, we redefined the industry because we thought outside the box. And there's a tendency to be safe and stick with people who have always done the same thing. But if you always do the same thing, you're going to get the same answer. You need to challenge yourself and be open to different perspectives. But you also have to understand that that comes with some risk because you're giving everyone a voice, and you've got to be open to them disagreeing with you. I'm open to that as long as everyone's doing it in a respectful way. I think that's why I was most effective as a leader, because I didn't take any of that personally. I was open to that. And I would encourage you to look for people to work with who have that kind of mindset.
Looking for people that kind of challenge your beliefs and challenge your perspective.
And are open to what you have to say. Look, there was this belief for a long time in business and in entrepreneurship and in all industries that, you got to work your way up. Your voice gets heard as you work your way up the org chart. Today, you got to turn that upside down, because there are a lot of people who are established in their careers. And I don't even mean like 50, 60-year-olds. I mean 40-year-olds who don't understand technology the way a Gen Z person understands it. So, why would you not want both of those perspectives to be heard? It's never been more important for young people to have a voice in business than it is today, because technology is changing so fast. And Gen Z you're digital natives. I mean, you learn things quickly that maybe someone who's been around for a while might not be able to pick up quite as fast. Now, that's always been true, but now it's faster, and it's happening at a much more accelerated rate. So I'm a big believer in having a combination of experience and new perspective. And your first 6 months in any job, fundamentally, I believe, are the best 6 months. That's when you have the best ideas. That's when you're seeing things through fresh eyes, fresh perspective. Write those things down, because honestly, there will never be a time that you'll be able to create more value for a company. They may not be ready to hear it right away, but you definitely want to write it down and record it.
We actually have some questions from our attendees here today. So the first one, what failure taught you the most, but it didn't feel like a failure at the time?
Hmm. Personally or professionally?
Let's say we professionally.
Okay. When I built that, I spent a year building that company, and it was called RadiusNet, and it didn't ultimately get off the ground. I mean, I didn't consider it a failure because someone else took our business plan and offered me a position. So what happened was, at the end of that year, there was someone else who could raise the money and be the CEO, and he wanted that business plan. And he offered me a key position on his team to do that with him. So at the time, I didn't really think of it as a failure because I knew that it was a solid business plan and I knew someone else wanted it. But looking back, I didn't know what I was like. I didn't have enough experience. I like literally didn't know what I was doing. I was just refusing to give up. There's no question that there were a lot of mistakes that were made and could have been avoided with more experience. So ultimately, it was a failure. But the truth is that failure is what prepared me for success. So, I've had others too where I've tried to launch them and they haven't been successful. That one's just a really clear example because what I did in that company, not having any experience in being an entrepreneur really prepared me to be successful as an entrepreneur. So I would say be open to that. Be nice if you have some savings to get through the tough spots, but just understand that you've got to take a little bit of risk and you also have to be able to bounce back from those things.
Very insightful. Our next question is actually kind of talking about co-leaders and etc. So, have you ever encountered people that you've worked with that have kind of carried negative energy towards you and
Oh,
were
sure.
uncomfortable like with your leadership potential? Essentially, the situation behind this is one of our attendees unfortunately just had the experience where the people around them were uh, creating false accusations, etc., against our attendee, and this led
Yes.
to them resigning. So, do you
So,
have, yeah, any insight on that?
great question. And tell me if you want to go a little deeper on it. But when I went to that company that I shared the story of building this company out of bankruptcy, or insolvency, that company was a tech transfer deal out of NSA, and there were two founders out of NSA, 32 years and 20 years respectively, well-established people with strong technical credentials. They hired me to come in and be the CEO of their company, and I'd just been, through a year of trying to get another company off the ground. I took a tremendous amount of risk, and the truth is, if we're being honest, they didn't have any other options. They'd already been through a management team and it didn't succeed. Their families were done. They were 3.5 years into this and it was time to shut it down. And when I signed on, there was a tremendous amount of risk. I mean, there was zero, and I mean zero, certainty of success. So I understood that they had taken a risk, but I had taken more risk than they did because they had raised some angel money and they spent all of it. They owned the technology. Like I was the person who was taking the most risk at that point because I didn't own any of it and I was going to be responsible for raising the money for all of us to get paid and to build the product. So nothing happened for any of us. None of us got paid. Nothing happened until I raised the money. And the only thing I had was equity. And that was dependent on being successful raising the money and then successfully building the company. So I showed up ready every day, like 100% committed to making this happen. And it was clear from the beginning that one of the founders did not want to work with me. Now, one of them was phenomenal, and the other one did not want to work with me. And I could tell because he wasn't very helpful or cooperative. And honestly, we also had a challenge because he would say inappropriate things in front of potential investors. So, you got to manage this. In business, there are a lot of personalities, and you just have to accept that. Well, I kind of was starting to get the feeling that he wanted to be the CEO. And meanwhile, they've hired me to do this job. So I tried to encourage him at first. I tried to be nice and be like, hey, why don't you, go get your MBA and get some experience and, get on a path to being the person who, runs the company. And he didn't want to do that. And one day we were sitting around the conference room table. It's a very small conference room. And he was challenging me again, which was happening pretty much all the time. And finally, like he lost his cool and he yelled at me, "I just can't work for a woman." Well, just like just like you like need to know when to show up and work hard and give it everything you have, you also need to know when to walk away. And so instead of getting upset, I very calmly pushed myself away from the conference room table, got up, and walked out the door. You have to know when to leave. And so I left. A couple hours later, I got a knock on my door saying, "Will you come back?" Now, it doesn't always work out that way, but the truth is that sometimes you have to know when to walk away. I don't know your situation, so I don't know whether you should stay or walk away, but I will say this: document your role. One of the biggest reasons that companies fail in the early stages is lack of clarity around founding roles, around who owns what, who does what. And this was my personal experience, and it's what I was taught at Stanford. The most important things you can do in the early days are to document ownership and contribution and to keep really good records, financial records, legal records. If you don't do that, then it becomes a debate. And I'm going to share a real quick story. I know someone who launched a company who raised 55 million in venture capital. And this was a while ago, but it's the same story, just as relevant today. And this was a well-established person in their space with one of the top venture firms in the country. They raised $55 million. They went through the entire documentation process, which is extensive, and the money was about to be wired into their account. And they had someone who worked on the company in the early days who claimed co-founder status. And they sent an email saying that they were challenging this and that they wouldn't accept the cap table as it was presented in these closing documents. The entire deal blew up. They never got funded and the company folded. Like it never got off the ground. So something they had spent months, if not years, building up to this point of raising the money and launching the company literally evaporated overnight because there was a potential co-founder who was challenging the allocation of equity. Very important to document these things very early on, from the earliest days. And even if you don't have a lawyer, document it in email, because email is sufficient to protect you if there's ever a question about who owns what. Just make sure that it's going back and forth between all the parties involved. I hope that's helpful. If you want to go a little deeper, just let me know. Oh, actually, we're already an hour into this conversation, but I'm happy to answer one or two more questions if we can.
Perfect. Yeah, yeah, I think that was a sufficient and well answered.
It's not
Um,
easy. Interpersonal stuff is some of the hardest stuff in business, but it is essential to do it well.
mhm. Yeah, and I guess one final question before our time here is up, but if you could give one piece of advice to any aspiring entrepreneur, no matter where they are in their career, early 20s or well established in their career, trying to pivot into entrepreneurship, what is one thing, one piece of advice that you would give them so that they stick it through to the end?
Well, you need to go where you want to be, right? So perspective comes from being around people who are doing the things that you want to do. If you want to be an entrepreneur, go to entrepreneurial events. If you want to be an entrepreneur, talk to other entrepreneurs. If you want to be an entrepreneur, float your idea by people who could potentially challenge what might or might not work about it. Put yourself out there in a way that says, that you're serious about it. And you can do that long before you make the leap, right? You can go to
Mhm.
events and be in the community long before you make the decision. At the end of the day, there is risk involved, though, and you have to accept that because it's really hard to build something without taking some risk. You can prepare for that, but understand that you're going to have to take risk if you want that potential for upside. And you can do everything right and still not succeed, which is so hard to accept. But if you accept that, you might get there. You might just do it.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for your time. That is all the questions we have here today. Um,
Thanks, Ishwar. This was awesome.
yeah, of course,
You did a
anytime.
great
I'm glad to
job.
be here.
Yeah, thanks to both Laura and Ishwar. This was a great conversation. Laura, we really appreciate you sharing all of your experiences. Um, yeah, and we appreciate everybody who attended and shared questions in the chat. If you have, Laura's actually done a couple of other workshops and presentations for us, and so please feel free to log on and check them out on our YouTube channel. But again, thanks everybody, and have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday.
And have a wonderful holiday season.
Thanks,
Safe
everyone.
travels. Take care.